Well, hi, Dr. Ortiz. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here to talk about your research and all the exciting things that you've been doing over at Newhouse and as an affiliate of the Lerner Center. So I'm just going to jump right in if that's okay with you.
Sounds great.
My first question is, I'm hoping that you can just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your personal and your educational background.
Sure. So I'm Rebecca Ortiz, and as you already said, I'm a professor in the Newhouse School, which is the School of Public Communications. I'm specifically in the advertising department, but my own research is focused around more broadly than advertising, specifically looking at teens, sexuality, and media is a lot of what I focused on. And my background is I got my PhD at UNC in mass communications with a focus on health communications. I actually got my master's here at Syracuse University, so I've been Orange for a while. And got
Woo-woo.
my undergraduate at VCU in Richmond, Virginia. So Virginia is home for me. I worked for a little while in marketing and research before I went to grad school, but I really found my interest in research in a marketing research job that I did, and then realized I really wanted to do the research on topics that interested me. And then sexuality, media, and adolescence just became the thing that I tended to focus on.
Yeah, that's a very, hot and interesting topic.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
everyone's always asking questions about that.
I always
So
and I always say like I pick something that I'd never get bored with, basically.
yeah, that's what you should do, right?
Yeah.
So with that, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your research and like what you're looking into and the type of things that you either have done or are looking forward to doing in the future?
Yeah, the most recent thing that I've done that I'm really excited about and proud of is I co-edited a book that's called Teens, Sex, and Media Effects. And it's a collaboration with a bunch of other researchers and original research that we each of us have done around different topics relating to adolescent sexuality and the use of media and its effects on adolescents in terms of how they develop their identities around their gender and sexual identities. Also related to, what are some of the effects of this in terms of self-concept, sexual violence, image-based sexual abuse, and then
Mhm.
also looking at, how do teens use media for advocacy purposes and education purposes when it comes to sexual health. So it's a really exciting project putting this book together. We just submitted it to the publisher less than a month ago, and it should be in print by the end of this year, but was just really
Oh,
excited to put all that together. And then some of the other research I've done over the past, I've done a lot of stuff around interventions and campaigns specifically focused on improving teens' knowledge around their sexual health. I've focused a lot on HPV vaccination in particular, the human papillomavirus vaccination. And then I've also done just very varied work looking at how does media affect teens through this period. And talking about teens not just as like 15, 16, but well into like early adulthood. So up until about age 23 or 24. So that's been generally my work, but the book that's coming out is what I'm really excited about right now.
does the book also focus on the evolution of this, like over time, right? As social media has become more present, there's obviously been, shifting impacts. So does your book dive into that at all, or is it more like about present day influences and effects?
That's a great question. So the book is an homage to a book that was published a little over 20 years ago that was actually published and edited by who eventually became my doctoral advisor. And so the three of us who
Oh,
are editing the current book are all advisees of Dr. Jane Brown, who wrote the original book. And so this is not like a second edition of that book, but it's more an homage to that book that was written. And
mhm.
when that book was written about a little over 20 years ago, social media didn't exist. Cell phones didn't exist in the current form. So there is been this huge change, not just, I mean, not necessarily a huge change in how media affects, but just the media landscape in general. So we edited and put together this book with the focus on what are some of the changes since the last 20 years, and what are the different ways that we have to look at how media is incorporated into teen lives. So a lot of the research is looking at today and how is that playing out. But then we actually have a commentary at the end of the book that's all about, well, what does the future look like doing research in this area what are some of the things we need to be taking into account? For example, we don't have anything explicitly about AI in the book because that research is so brand new, and there's really not many people stepping into that space yet, but there will be, because there's been a lot, as we've seen in the news, there's been some usage of AI to engage in sexual violence and sexual abuse with children and adolescents. So there's going to be a whole area of research that's going to emerge around looking at not like the effects, the implications, and how teens are making sense of all that. So that'll be the book in another 20 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this book and future books, I mean, it seems like just like a required reading for parents that are raising children and understanding how social media influences their children's mental health and all aspects of their almost adulthood.
Yeah.
I'm interested, what got you interested in this topic?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been asked that several times, and it sounds kind of strange, but I don't remember a time not being interested in. When I was a teen myself, at 12 years old, or so right before, official adolescence, I moved from a different states, my family moved. And I remember it was a really interesting time period because it was a stressful time for me. I really struggled. And if anyone remembers that age range of about like 10 to 13, I mean, everything is like changing and coming online, and like, it's just
Awkward.
yeah, not many people look fondly back at that time in their lives because
No.
it's just such a, your hormones are kicking in, all that. And to move at that time, I remember being an adolescent, going to a new school, and I ended up going to a couple different schools over a couple years. Really having sort of an outsider perspective of what adolescence looked like, and being able to sort of step outside and see things in a way that I don't know I would have been able to see if I had just continued, in my education among my same peer groups and things like that. So I started out with an interest in adolescence when I was an adolescent myself. And then as I started to get interested in research and doing research, either from a more academic perspective or a more marketing research perspective, I realized like topics that were of just like real interest to me were kind of more taboo topics, things like sexuality. And then media was like, it crossed across every aspect of a young person's life. And so it just kind of, I knew I loved research. I was interested in adolescence. And then that topic just sort of developed over time. Again, just something I'll never be bored with. And there's a lot left unknown, and there's a lot to be addressed in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the media is ever shifting and, ever present, and also but shifting how, people are interacting with it. So it's a topic that like has no end, right? It's like it's ongoing. There's always going to be a new question to ask and something new to learn, which is really cool. So based on the research that you've already done, like what would you say is like one big takeaway that you would want people to know? And you can even, if it's easier to frame this in like, okay, I'm a mom of young children.
Right.
What should I know?
Right. Oh, you know what? There's like a million things that come to mind, but I'll tell you the one that's been like kind of top of mind recently and this is something that I've taken on. I've had this takeaway for a while, so this is not new. And it's not unique even, like other researchers will agree with this, which is that to understand media's effects on adolescents and how they incorporate that into their lives, specifically around sexuality and sexual health, we always have to understand this from a sex positive approach, because it's really, really easy. And I've been guilty of this. It's really easy to jump right to what are the negative effects of this content, of this exposure, of this engagement. And what happens though is when we look at pornography, or we talk about teens using media to create sexual imagery, which can fall under categories of child pornography, it becomes this very complex thing, and it's very easy to villainize it, to demonize all of this, and just see it all as bad. But then we have to step back and remind ourselves that this is a time of identity formation and development. And so we all need to make sure that kids have access to credible, accurate, sex positive information so that their sexual health and their identities are developed in healthy ways. And so we have to be very careful to balance the negative with the positive, if you will, because it's not all negative, though there are some really horrific things that can happen. Like when we talk about sexual abuse, sexual violence, sextortion, pedophilia, all these things that are really, really dark topics, but then also acknowledging that in the same way, young people are using the internet and using media to make sense of their identities and sexualities. And that can be a really great opportunity to engage with them in healthy ways. So that's been something I always have to remind myself of when I do this research.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really important and a great takeaway. Just really quickly, if I can ask one follow-up question, are there, do you see major gender differences between and how, okay, can you speak to some of that?
You're like, yes, absolutely. Yes. You'll see, I mean, you can break it down intersectionally in a lot of different ways. So of course, gender is just one identity marker that you can look at and see differences. And of course, you also want to be careful not to just look at young people through the binary lens of male, girl, boy, because you see those who are, you know, non-cis, who are trans, who might engage, who might identify as non-binary. They're dealing with certain effects as well. But when we look at girls and boys, if we're just going to look at the differences between those, girls are disproportionately affected by sexual abuse, manipulation, sextortion, these kinds of things. And pornography has, you know, boys are more likely to engage with pornography. Girls are more likely to have some of these negative effects. But I think when you start, it is important to look at the gender differences. And it is important to understand what's happening so that you can address these issues. But we have to also acknowledge they're not existing in bubbles, right? It's a collaborative effort, all of this, especially one of the big things that's changed in this research area is that young people are no longer just consumers of media, they're creators now.
Right,
yeah. Part of the whole content process. And so, yes, we do see gender differences and pretty major gender differences when it comes to, when we talk about specifically like sexual violence, but they're not existing in a vacuum. And so there's the culture and the cultural expectations, the heteronormativity and all those things that play a role in how these things play out. And so we don't want to attack, you know, boys for being bad or girls for being whatever the label is. We want to look at the whole holistic picture to address some of these actual negative effects.
Yes, finger snaps for that.
Yeah, right. Easier said than done. Easier said than done, though.
Right, of course, yeah. Well, I mean, I'm so glad that there's someone like you doing this research who cares as much as you do and can talk about it so eloquently. We need more Rebeccas in the world that are doing this as well as you are. To end our interview, I just, you know, more of a, I guess, lighter note. Is there a favorite book, podcast, or movie that you've been really into right now and, you know, would like to give a shout out to or recommend for people who are looking for something to entertain their time with?
Yeah, this is a book that is not related at all to what I was just talking about, but it I think actually does kind of speak to what I was saying about the, you know, kind of villainizing one group over the other. It's a book called Why We're Polarized by Ezra Klein. It's something I just picked up at the used bookstore. So I'm not saying like that everyone would agree with the takeaways or that it's, you know, not necessarily something that everyone's going to be interested in, but it does a really interesting job at looking at some things that I actually have done a little bit of research on, but really looking at the us versus them binary that happens in politics and how did that develop specifically in American politics. And it's a good reminder that as humans, you know, we're social creatures. We're often just trying to like make it through and we're really just trying to support our side, which means we often then discriminate out groups, those who are not like us, and how that actually plays out in politics. And of course, right now with the election coming up, I've been wanting to dive more into how political identity plays a role in the decision making that we make, not just around voting, but other things. And I think it's the same sort of thing I was just saying is being careful to understand differences in gender or race or all these kind of stuff. It's super important, but understanding there are nuances to all that too. So yeah, that's the book that I've been reading.
Yeah. That sounds awesome. And if you have not linked up at all with Dr. Shana Gadarian in the political science over at Maxwell, you should, because she does a lot of that work. She's also a Lerner affiliate that I'm hoping to interview soon. But she does a lot on polarization. So that would be cool to see the two of you find a way to link up together on that topic. But yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was so interesting. You're doing really cool research. So happy to have you a part of the Lerner Center. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's always great to chat with you.
Bye.